it's Tina and I am back, and I am here with a swatch and review for the Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance palette, which has been making its rounds. Everybody is in love with this palette, and I wanted to come here and give my 2 cents about this palette. But first we're gonna jump into the swatches because I know that's what you guys are here for, and then after that we'll go ahead and jump into the review. So let's go ahead and do some swatching. So here we have an overall look at the eyeshadows in the palette. There are 2 rows of 7 shades. So here we have the shades Tempera and Golden Ochre. Then we have Vermeer and Bone Fresco. Followed by Antique Bronze, Love Letter, and Cyprus Amber. In the next row we have the shades Raw Sienna and Burnt Orange, which is a permanent shade. Primavera and Red Ochre. Then we have Venetian Red and Warm Taupe. And then Religar. As usual, I'm going to be doing my swatches over a very light layer of primer, and today I am using my Kat Von D Shade and Light eyeshadow brush. The first shade up is Tempera, which is described as a beige with an ultra matte finish. This is a light peach colored beige shade. It has medium pigmentation in 2 swipes. Then we have the shade Golden Ochre, which is described as an earthy yellow with an ultra matte finish as well. Golden Ochre is a yellow toned beige nude shade. This one has medium pigmentation and it doesn't really build up to an opaque finish, but it would be great for a blend-in color in the crease. Then we have Vermeer, which is an iridescent shell with a metallic finish. This one is a shimmery pinky peach beige shade with a frosty finish. It doesn't really come off as a metallic on my skin, it's more of a frost. Then we have the shade Bone Fresco, which is an antique lavender with an ultra matte finish. Bone Fresco is a dusty rosy neutral shade with a matte finish. It comes off as a neutral rosy pink. Then we have the shade Antique Bronze, which is a metallic sable with a satin finish. This one is a medium bronzy brown shade with a satin finish. It has a slight sheen to it and decent pigmentation. Then we have the shade Love Letter, which is described as a raspberry with an ultra matte finish. And Love Letter is exactly that. It's a raspberry red shade, so it has a lot of that berry undertone to it. And it has decent color payoff considering that it is more of a red tone, which can be a little bit choppy. And this matte finish applies smoothly and it has great blendability. Then we have Cyprus Amber, which is described as a dark coffee, and this one has an ultra matte finish as well. This is a deep, dark, matte brown shade. It would work great to darken up a look in the outer crease and the outer V, and again, it applies smoothly without being patchy at all. Moving on to the second row, we have the shade Raw Sienna, which is described as a neutral amber with an ultra matte finish. Raw Sienna is more of a warm caramel medium tone brown shade. This would work great for a transition shade in the crease or for just everyday neutral looks. We have the shade Primavera, which is described as a shimmery gold. This one is more of a very light golden champagne shade with a frost finish. It takes a little bit of layering to get it to full opacity, and it's not a metallic finish at all, it's more of a high frost sheen. Then we have Red Ochre, which is described as Sienna with an ultra matte finish. Red Ochre is kind of a burnt cranberry shade. It has that red tone to it as well as a hint of orange. It's a very interesting shade and it works well in warm looks and can work well in the crease, and it builds up really nice and it's very smooth in pigmentation. And then we have Venetian Red, which is described as a crimson, and this one is said to have an ultra matte finish. Now this one is more of a cherry red shade, but it's still like a deep burnt red, and it has more of a satin finish to me than a matte because there's very fine, ultra fine shimmer in this that makes it more blendable than a matte, but you definitely see a little bit of sheen to it. And then we have the shade Warm Taupe, which is described as an earthy gray with an ultra matte finish. This one to me is more of a gray toned taupey brown shade. Again, a great color for neutral looks and building up in the crease or using as a transition shade. And then last up we have Realgar, which is described as a brick with an ultra matte finish. Realgar is a deep burnt orange brick shade. Again, smooth color payoff. There's no patchiness to this, and it definitely does have that ultra matte finish. Really smooth, and it has great pigmentation as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I skipped over a shade which is burnt orange. This one is described as a deep orange with an ultra matte finish, and it feels like the stepchild right now. So this one is a orangey toned brown shade. It's a very warm brown, and it's more of a caramelly orange, and this one is from the permanent range, and it's one of my favorite colors to use in the crease for warm looks. So here again are all 14 shades in the palette. There are a number of crease shades that you can work with. There are actually 3 crease shades that would be great for blending in the crease and using as transition shades. And the majority of these shades are matte. There are 2 shades that are definitely shimmery, frosty shades. And then 1 shade that is more of a satin with a sheen. A couple of the shades that are described as ultra matte also have microfine shimmer in there. It's very fine, it's very sparse, so it's not gonna come off on your lids like that. It's gonna apply and blend mostly matte. I think it's a nice selection of shades for someone who is into those more warm toned looks and definitely appreciate a red shade in a palette, because there are quite a few shades that have red undertones in this palette, or berry undertones. So if you're looking for a palette like this, it has a great selection of neutral shades, has a couple of highlight shades, and only a couple of shimmery shades. Alright guys, so now that you have seen the swatches, you got a little bit of an idea of how I feel about the eyeshadow quality and how they apply and perform. Let's go ahead and run through the review. Now this palette is the brainchild and the baby of Norvina, who is Anastasia's daughter. She's the curator of this palette, and I really admire and respect her work ethic and just how she approaches the creation of palettes and eyeshadows, and she goes through the formulation, and she's a really hard worker, and I really admire and respect her. She's one of those people that I would love to be friends with and to work with, just because I really admire her so much. But she was inspired by the Renaissance period with those different artists and painters, and the color theme is reflective of that. As you can see, there are a lot of brick tones and oranges and berry tones. And she also has a couple of names here that match up to the period, which I thought was a really nice theme for her to have. And as usual, the first thing I like to talk about is price. So this palette retails for $42, and you do get 14 eyeshadow shades included, plus a double-ended brush. And each of these eyeshadows are 0.7 grams of product, or 0.02 ounces, which gives us about a third of the size of each of our single eyeshadow pans that retail for $12. And these contain 0.059 ounces of product. So you're just about a third of the size of each of these singles for each of these 14 shades included in the palette. So you're getting about 4.5, a little bit over 4.5 shades for the price of $42. Each of our eyeshadows retail for $12 a piece, and if you buy them in bundles of 4, you get a free 4-well palette with them, and you get them at a discounted price of $40 for the 4 shades. If you buy them in a bundle of 8, you get that for $70 with a free 8-pan palette as well. So price-wise, you're paying a little bit more than you would pay for 4 of her single eyeshadows for about the same amount of product, but you do get 14 different shades to choose from. But just be mindful that you're gonna probably run through these shades a lot quicker than you would run through an eyeshadow single that's 3 times the size. Now the biggest thing for me with the price is that the last palette that was released, the self-made eyeshadow palette that was released a few months ago, this was $35. So we're talking about a $7 jump from $35 to $42 in the space of a couple of months for the same number of eyeshadows, and both palettes contain the same amount of product. This contains 14 eyeshadows as well, and each of these was 0.7 grams of product, as the same thing as this palette, but the eyeshadows look a little bit larger because I think they put them in more shallow pans and made them a little bit wider. So the layout might be deceiving. You might think you're getting more product in this when you're actually getting the same amount of product for a $7 price increase. This is the first permanent palette in her lineup, so I don't know if that's just the new pricing structure that they're gonna use for their palettes moving forward with 14 shades. And that price jump kind of threw me off because I always looked at Anastasia Beverly Hills as one of those more affordable mid-range brands. It's not quite as pricey as Too Faced or Urban Decay or Stila or even Makeup Forever. I always thought of this as an affordable mid-range brand that consumers could enjoy at a decent price point and still get a really good quality product. So I really didn't appreciate that steep price increase, but again, you're getting the same amount of product as you would for 4.5 of her singles at around the same price point. So value-wise, you aren't really saving much by getting the palette, but the palette does offer you the option of 14 shades that you can choose from, even though you might run through them a little bit sooner, but you get 14 shades to play around with. But then when you look at the price compared to other mid-range brands on the market where their palettes go for mid-40s to high 40s, even $50, you can see that this palette is on the lower side of the price spectrum, but it's still competing with Too Faced palettes that are $36 now for their smaller palettes, and then their chocolate bar palettes are $49. The Kat Von D palettes are also around $46 for a Shade and Light palette, and her Serpentina palette that just debuted was $45. So it's still coming in close to the price range of those brands, but it's not quite an Urban Decay Naked palette that is $54. So it's still on the lower end of the spectrum. I do think it is value for your money because Anastasia Beverly Hills does make great quality eyeshadows, and the quality stacks up against those other mid-range brands, even some high-end brands. So I do think price-wise it's worth it, but I'm just a little bit put off by that price increase. Now let's go ahead and talk about the packaging, which is a dusty rose theme. And the box that the palette comes in and the palette itself are of the same color theme. The box just says Modern Renaissance with the Anastasia Beverly Hills logo. And then on the back you have some details about the palette, and then you have the ingredients, of course. There's also a picture of the palette in color, which I really appreciate. I think that was really cute to add, although I'm gonna throw the box out. But it has the ingredient details in it, and the ingredients kind of line up with her current single eyeshadow formula. So it's not too far off from the existing formula. I know she's going through different improvements and trying to make the eyeshadows silkier, more pigmented, apply and blend easier. So there are ingredients and tweaks here and there, but the formula is very similar, if not identical. The box also has the little bunny that indicates that it's cruelty-free, but one thing that threw me was that it has the open jar symbol that says 6 months. That indicates that your use life is about 6 months. And that throws me off because I'm like, wait a minute, 6 months to use a complete eyeshadow palette? And these are powder eyeshadows, so they should have a longer shelf life, a longer usage life than a cream or a liquid. So for 6 months to be the usage life for this threw me off. So I'm wondering if the preservatives in these aren't very strong or intense, or they didn't put too many preservatives in this. But that's something to note, that it does say 6 months of usage life for this. I almost bit my tongue. Also on the box it says hyperallergenic and dermatologist tested, so that's always a good thing, right? And then it says that it contains carmine as a color additive. Now that will make it not a vegan product because carmine is made from crushed beetle shells. Carmine is a beetle that gives the red color to a lot of the shades in this palette. So if you have a carmine allergy or you're just opposed to using carmine, just know that it is in these eyeshadow palettes. Now the one thing that I found interesting is that it looks very similar to this palette right here, doesn't it? Yeah, this is the IT Cosmetics Naturally Pretty palette, which is a flocked velvet packaging. The layout is just like that. This is what it reminded me of when I picked it up, because the actual palette itself is like a faux velvet texture. It feels like velvet. It's a dusty rose shade with modern Renaissance printed. It's kind of embossed in white, and then the Anastasia Beverly Hills logo is down here in a rose gold shade, and the label on the back has all the details of the ingredients just like on the back of the box, except it doesn't have this pretty little color-coded photo. It also says made in the USA, which is always a great thing, and it has a little caution and warning statement that says discontinue use if signs of rash or irritation appear. Now that may be due to the red pigments that are included in the palette. These can cause irritation to the eyes. So if you have sensitivities, just be mindful that this can cause a little bit of a reaction. And if that happens, stop using it completely. So the brush itself is a dual-ended brush, and I actually do like the quality of this brush. I really like the blending part. It's a little bit scratchy, but it's usable, and it does buff out eyeshadows really nicely. And then the little synthetic pressed eyeshadow side, you can use this in a pinch. So while I wouldn't use this a normal eyeshadow application, in a pinch, or if I just need to grab something quick, this is a good addition to have in the palette. And again, there are 14 shades that are laid out. There's no rhyme or reason, there's no theme to this, they're just laid out in the palette itself, and it is secured by a magnetic clasp. So it does just flap over, and there are 2 magnets at each end that hold it secure. The one thing I will say right off the bat about the packaging that I do not like is this velvet finish. It seems good in theory, you're like, oh, that's pretty, it's a little bit luxurious, oh, let's do this. But it's a light dusty pink shade, and it's a velvet finish, so it gets dirty really quickly. Just in swatching, just in handling this, I had eyeshadow smudges all over. I have eyeshadow smudges on the edges, and it's just gonna look a little bit dirty in your collection unless you handle it with extreme care, and I doubt it's gonna happen. You're not gonna keep this pristine, it's gonna get messy. So that's the first thing I will say I didn't appreciate about the packaging at all. I like that they included a mirror, but the mirror is probably not usable because you're gonna have to hold it like this, and it's a thin mirror, it's a narrow mirror, so it's not like you can really get in there, but in a pinch the mirror is still very usable. So all in all, it's a decent packaging. I really just don't like the velvet finish. It's just a mess waiting to happen, and it's just gonna look really grimy in my collection, and it kind of drives me a little bit nuts, but who am I? Who am I? Now let's go ahead and talk about the product and performance and what I think about the overall palette. And I am probably gonna get a lot of flack for this, and a lot of people are gonna disagree with me because so many people love this palette, but I don't like the palette at all. I've been trying to like it for weeks upon weeks. I'm just like, use it, test it out, try it out, it's gonna work, something's gonna give, and I just can't jive with it. And it has nothing to do with the quality of the eyeshadows. I think the eyeshadow quality is on par with her single eyeshadows. I think they're beautiful, they're pigmented, they're smooth, they apply beautifully, they blend out easily. But the shades just don't work for my complexion. Now I've seen it on lighter complexion and I'm like, oh my goodness, it looks beautiful. The red tones look great on cooler skin tones, but for my very warm skin tone, these eyeshadows come off ruddy and muddy, and when I apply them and I try to blend them, they just never seem to come together. The red shades just don't vibe with my undertones. And I can't be the only one. I don't think I'm the only one. I try to love it so much. This Bond Fresco shade, is like an enemy to me. It is so ugly on my skin, and I'm not bashing Anastasia Beverly Hills, because the formula again is delicious. It is a beautiful formula. They blend well. They're really nice eyeshadows, but the shade selection doesn't work for me. And I know it works for a variety of skin tones, and I know a lot of people love the shade selection, but I feel like it's just too red and ruddy for me. And every look that I tried to create, I ended up doing the same thing, trying to make it work, and they just didn't work for me. I found myself having to mix other shades from other palettes or from my singles with this, because they just don't work well for me. And honestly, we have blending shades in here, we have crease shades, we have darkening shades, but these reds and somehow the orangey shades just don't look right on my skin. And as much as I tried to make them look right, they didn't work for me. So I don't like this palette at all. I really don't like this palette. It's just, it didn't work for my skin tone. And if you're my skin tone, let me know what you think. If you have tried this out and what you thought about it. I don't like it. I don't like it, not because of the formula, not because it doesn't perform well. It performs beautifully, but the colors just don't look good on my skin. And I find that also with a moist base or primer, it can really cling to the primer and look a little bit dark in spots, and and kind of cling to spots and look a little bit ruddy. And then when you try to blend it out, I ended up with the little spots of moisture, which I hardly get that anymore, but that ended up happening. So I had to use the Urban Decay eyeshadow primer. I went back to this from my MAC 24-hour eyeshadow base. That's the one I've been using, or the Smashbox 24-hour primer. I had to go back to this to try to get it to work, to not get that spotty moist effect. And it just didn't work for me. And I love Anastasia Beverly Hills. I love her single eyeshadows. They're some of the best matte single eyeshadows on the market. And I love her metallic shades. But this palette just didn't work for me. It didn't jive for me. I just didn't like it at all. And again, I want to enforce, and I want to say it again, and I want to repeat it until it's drilled into your head. It's not the formula. The formula is nice. It's the shades and how they apply to the skin and how they mix in with moisture. Just, they don't work on me. So let me know what you guys think if you have tried this palette out. What are your thoughts? I know a lot of people love it, and I'm probably one of the very few people that don't like it one bit. So let me know what you guys think, and until my next video, which will be very soon, I'll talk to you. Bye guys.